Chapter 31. The gate falls. Ganondorf comes to Hyrule Castle. The apotheosis of Princess Zelda. The lines did not shine with the brilliant luminosity of old. In the past, the runes and circles she had traced had always shone brightly even before the design was completed. The gentle strokes of her fingers had left behind them blazing swoops and whirls of light, thrumming with the power of the entire city of Hyrule, a city she had built with the single-minded purpose of compounding that power upon itself, again and again, until she at last had the vast reserves of magic that she needed. Her great battery was silent, now, deprived of the spark that would have been the genesis of the massive chain reaction. Deprived of the Triforce. Hence the reason for her current work. Zelda drew new designs on the white floor of the vast circular chamber. She could not draw with the light, anymore, but she could etch the runes into the marble floor with bursts of magic. For she still had magic within her, and even without her piece of the Triforce she was terribly powerful. A gust of wind caught the deep purple cloth of her cape, and her armor clinked softly as she closed the circle and so finished the first point of her design. A circle just wide enough for a man to stand in, gilt with words of power invoking the blessing of courage. Link would stand here. Now she had to add the circles for her and Ganondorf. This room had been built, centuries ago, for the explicit purpose of being used for the ceremony. It was not at the top of Hyrule's tallest tower, but rather its strongest and most prominent, and every day the banners of her rule hung from the balcony that ringed its circumference. There were no walls. The high ceiling was supported by thick pillars of stone that provided little shelter against the wind and the cold. It was no coincidence that this tower lay over the exact center of the city of Hyrule. Many fathoms below was the place where the Triforce of Wisdom had once rested, but the heart of the enchantment had been destroyed and so the city was dark to her. No matter. The framework for the great sorcery remained, and she could easily create a new heart, one that was fueled by all three pieces of the mighty relic. As she bent back to her work, a sudden noise drifted up towards her from the city below, a deep echoing boom that seemed to make the foundations of the castle shake ever so slightly. The sound reverberated through the cold air and off the spires and stone walls of Hyrule Castle before fading into silence. And, slowly, other faint noises began to fill that absence. The sounds of screams, of shouts of agony and of rage, and of metal on metal. Far below her, the battle had begun. She began to work a bit faster. Ashay's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Whatever she had said was utterly drowned out by the ringing in Link's ears that seemed to vibrate through his entire skull. What? He was shouting, he knew, but although he could feel the strain of it in his throat, he could not hear his own words. Ashay gestured for him to follow her, and together they ran, keeping as low as they could, through the smoky chaos that was the shattered high street. As Link's hearing gradually came back to him, the sounds of battle began to penetrate the haze of white noise. Ashay led him to a partially collapsed house, and together they ducked inside. Ganondorf was crouched just inside the doorway. His lips and teeth were stained red and he was holding a handkerchief daubed with blood to his mouth.
Link. You're alive. I'm fine. What happened to you?
Ganondorf seemed to see the bloody piece of cloth for the same time.
Oh, this is nothing. When the explosion happened I bit my tongue. Hey, you guys having trouble hearing?
Ashay asked. They had brought 2 kegs of Goron mining powder to blow the castle gates open. The explosive was extremely volatile, but more than powerful enough to blast a hole in the wall surrounding Hyrule Castle if placed properly. The Goron Darmani had managed to place the barrels properly, although many lives had been lost defending him from the assault raining down from atop the battlements. But something had gone wrong, and the powder had detonated before they could retreat to a safe distance. Link thought it very likely that Darmani was dead, and a great many of their comrades besides.
The explosives worked, Ganondorf said. There's a hole in that wall large enough for 10 men to walk through abreast. But Zelda's forces still defend the entrance to the castle grounds, and the remainder of our forces are pinned down in these houses. Where's Midna?
Link asked. The look of Ganondorf's face was one of worry.
I don't know. She carries a piece of the Triforce now, so I believe we would be able to feel it if she died. What if she does die? What happens to the Triforce then? That is uncertain. But I believe its power would return to Zelda. She is its true master.
Together they sidled up to a blasted-out window and peered out. The high street was strewn with rubble and corpses, and any Gerudo who still lived had taken shelter, either inside the houses that still stood or in side streets and alleyways. Link spotted Groose, the burly youth from Telma's, holding an enormous longbow and crouching next to two Zoras armed with pikes. The lull was broken by a woman's voice, the sorceress Varen, ringing clearly through the air.
And where are the leaders of this pitiful uprising? Cowering like rats trapped in a hole? Come and give yourself up. Surrender now, and we'll give all of you the mercy of a quick death.
Link turned to Ganondorf.
Got a plan? Not really. Whole day kind of went to hell when those barrels exploded at the wrong time. Well, you've got maybe 2 minutes to come up with one. That should be plenty.
He stood up.
Don't let me die out there.
Ash's eyes widened.
Wait. What are you?
Link stepped out into the high street, raising his hands high above his head.
I surrender.
He yelled.
I command the Gerudo, and on behalf of all who swore service to me I offer my surrender. I know what Ganondorf looks like, idiot, and you're not him.
Varen said. She was standing in the center of the street, at the lip of the enormous crater that had been carved out by the explosion. There were soldiers fanned out beside her, and archers atop the parts of the wall that still stood.
But I know who you are. You're Link. And Her Highness is very interested in you.
She raised her hand, and in an instant every one of the men lining the walls had knocked arrows, drawn back their bowstrings, and were awaiting the word to fire. Link quickly began to count the men aiming at him, but gave up when he reached 50.
Ganondorf is dead. I lead in his stead. Will you not at least take me to Princess Zelda so that we may negotiate?
She smiled.
Negotiate? What's there to negotiate? Didn't I just say that the only reward for surrender is a quick death? Archers, you may kill this man.
There was the twang of many bowstrings, and death came hissing towards him through the air. He barely had time to blink, however, before the air in front of him caught fire, and the volley of arrows was utterly incinerated in a roiling wall of flame that had sprung from nowhere. As he threw up his arms to shield his face from the heat of the flames, the fire coalesced and poured forth down the high street, bearing down on Varen and the soldiers defending the gate with terrible speed. Wave upon wave of flame crashed down upon the sorceress, until she was completely hidden from view by the inferno that had engulfed her, burning with such a fierce intensity that the very stones of the high street had begun to melt.
Do you think that killed her?
Midna said, from where she had appeared at Link's side. Her brow was beaded from the concentration of summoning such a massive amount of fire, and her miniature feet were planted firmly in midair as though she were setting herself against some great weight.
Don't bet on it.
Ganondorf stood next to him on the opposite side. He, too, was working magic, carefully directing the powerful flames that Midna was conjuring.
Be ready.
Suddenly, pieces of molten cobblestone lifted up from the ground and were flung through the air, straight at them. Midna was forced to raise one hand to shield herself, and the torrent of fire ceased.
Charge!
Ganondorf bellowed, and all around them Gerudo poured forth from their hiding places, screaming battle cries and sprinting towards the ruined gate. Link, too, was shouting as he ran, right beside Ganondorf at the very head of the charge. Arrows whizzed by his head, striking his comrades down, and Varen was throwing as much magic as she could at the charge, but they were too close and too many to be stopped. The battle was joined in a tremendous cataclysm of metal and blood, and within seconds Link's world had descended into total chaos. He batted aside spear and axe, thrusting and parrying with the master's sword, hewing a path through the ranks of soldiers towards the sorceress. She saw him, and smiled. Lightning sprung from her fingers and arced its way towards him, the air sizzling with the heat of it. He caught the magic with his sword and turned it aside, and the first hints of panic grew in Varen's eyes as he deflected bolt after bolt of her magic and drew nearer still. Then he was upon her, and it was all that Varen could do now to parry his own attacks, meeting them with magic barriers that she conjured out of nowhere. She lunged forward, inside the reach of his sword, and her hand crackled with deadly power once again. Link batted her arm away with his shield, and she caught the hand holding his sword and forced it upwards, and for a moment they both struggled, desperate to get free and strike the killing blow that was sure to come. Varen gasped oddly, and looked down at the blade that was suddenly protruding from her stomach. She let go of Link, and the magic died upon her fingers. Her hands went to clutch at the wound, and her clothing was already dark with blood.
How?
Vissen drew his sword out of Varen's back, and the sorceress fell to her knees, twisting backwards in an attempt to get a glimpse of her attacker.
You?
She said, seeing him.
I knew. Traitor. Be quiet.
He stabbed once more. Varen made a pained, breathless sound, fell forward, and moved no more.
So you finally picked a side?
Link noted. Vissen stepped away from the body of the sorceress.
I've only ever been on one side, Link. Yours.
He raised his sword high into the air and shouted.
Hold the gate. Rally to me, and hold the gate.
All around them, the battlefield had degenerated even further into madness, as some of the Hylian soldiers turned on each other and others began to fight back with a renewed vigor. Link saw Midna floating high above the melee, picking targets and throwing fireballs, and Ashe and Gruz fighting back to back. Of Ganondorf, there was no sign.
To me, to me.
Vissen shouted still. Many of the soldiers were turning on their former comrades, and the surviving members of the Gerudo had realized what was happening. Spurred on by their sudden change in fortune, they pushed forward through the mob towards the place where Vissen and Link stood at the breach in the wall. They were inside the gate now, and all across the castle gardens makeshift barriers of wood and stone had been constructed and manned by pikemen and archers.
To the barricades!
Link bellowed.
Take the barricades! Forward!
Vissen brought his sword slicing down, signaling a charge.
For Hyrule!
Together they pressed forward, Link and Vissen, fighting side by side and leading the charge into the castle grounds. Disoriented and demoralized, Zelda soldiers fled or were slaughtered as the tide of invading warriors swept over them. From behind the ranks of Hylian soldiers there now came flashes of magic, and renewed cries of rage and pain. More of Zelda's men had turned, and what order there had been in the defenders was now completely and utterly disrupted.
Our path is clear,
Vissen said.
The gate and the south terrace are ours for the taking. Vaati has opened the way for us. Vaati.
Link looked about and, sure enough, he was soon able to spot the wind mage. Vaati floated at the center of a maelstrom of wind and lightning, and any man in his path was lifted up into the air and thrown down again upon his comrades. The Gerudo's push, combined with Vaati's timely appearance, had allowed them to establish a firm foothold inside the castle walls. Zelda's troops had lost all semblance of command, and were falling back and yielding the main gate.
We have a little bit of time before they regroup. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe half an hour.
Vissen was breathing heavily, and his hair was soaked with sweat.
You and Vaati timed your betrayal well,
Link said.
If we fall back now, we can easily hold the main gate until nightfall. But we'll need enough time to properly construct a barricade and establish position atop the walls. That could take 2 hours, or more.
Vissen tore a strip of cloth off of a dead man's trousers and began to wipe the blood from his sword.
Then we'll have to buy that time. No,
Vaati said.
What?
Vissen's face was grim.
Zelda's got some plot cooked up, and she's ordered her men to hold the castle for as long as possible. Whatever she's planning, we can't give her the time she needs. You need to get inside that castle, and you need to get there now.
Link looked around at what remained of the Gerudo forces. It was under 2,000 men, easily, and many of those were wounded or poorly armed. With the reinforcements brought by Vissen and Vaati's betrayal, they had a fighting force of maybe 2,500, all told.
We'll never make it, we're wildly outnumbered. We may never make it,
Vissen said,
but you will. We can assault the main entrance on the southern side of the castle while you circle through the gardens and find another way in. Here's some good news, at least,
Vaati said.
Look at that.
They turned to look down on the city below. Hyrule was burning, dark plumes of smoke rising high into the sky, and fires burning in many of the wealthier districts.
The city is in open revolt, the vizier continued. Zelda's hold on Hyrule is failing. If we win here today, our victory will be complete. Don't you see, none of it matters?
Vissen shouted. He was growing increasingly agitated.
The only thing that matters is that Zelda is captured or killed. Link, please listen to me. Zelda wanted the three of you separated. She wanted you to come to her individually. Whatever her plan is, it involves you, Ganondorf, and Midna, and right now it is proceeding perfectly.
Vaati interrupted him.
Ganondorf is gone.
Link whirled around, scanning the battlefield, and he quickly realized that Vaati was right. The hulking form of the Gerudo King was nowhere to be seen. He spotted Midna floating through the carnage with Navi sitting atop her helm, and he called the two of them over.
Midna. Navi. We've got a problem. Ganondorf is gone,
Midna finished for him.
Navi saw him last right after the charge. He fought his way through the front lines and made straight for the castle doors.
Navi wrung her hands desperately.
The last I saw of him, he had opened the doors and gone inside, all by himself. I'm really worried about him. Link, what are we going to do?
Link sighed and slowly met the gaze of Midna, of Navi, of Vissen, and Vaati. He noticed also that many of the men and women wearing Gerudo colors had clustered around the five of them, and that the rebellious Hylian soldiers were looking to him also. They were waiting on his word, all of them. With Ganondorf gone, Link was now in command.
We'll attack the southern walls. Vissen, Vaati, you two lead the assault. Navi, you stay with them, they'll need your healing magic much more than I will. But what are you going to do?
She asked.
Midna and I are going into the castle. We'll find a way in through the gardens. We'll take a few men with us, maybe 20, 30, and fight our way as high up as we can. This fight won't end until Zelda is stopped, and we're the only ones who can do it.
Vissen grasped Link's hand and shook it.
So we're decided, then. Fight well, Link, we're all counting on you.
Meeting the old soldier's gaze, Link realized that Vissen was expecting to die that day. Despite everything, he felt a rush of gratitude towards the man, and he clasped the veteran's gauntlet hand tightly.
Fight well,
he said.
So, when are we doing this?
Midna asked.
Right now,
Link said.
Vissen, you're in command now. Form up and prepare to assault the southern walls. And I need volunteers, 20 of the best, to come with me and Midna.
Almost immediately, men and women began stepping forward. There was Ashe, and Groose, and Gorko, and 100 other solemn faces, all willing to die for him.
Good luck, you poor bastards,
Vaati said, just loud enough for everyone present to hear. Most men had the sense to step aside and let him pass. They turned in time to see who it was that approached their positions and blanched, letting their weapons fall to the ground and making way for the fury that bore down upon them. Some were brave enough, or stupid enough, to stand and draw swords, or raise pikes, or bring their bows to bear. They were cut down, without thought, without effort, and without mercy. No barricade gave him pause, no door barred his way, and no man hindered his passing. Ganondorf, imbued for the last time with the pure and driving sense of purpose that had consumed him for so many lifetimes, had come. Like something out of a nightmare, he charged through the halls and passages of Hyrule Castle, his sword of light shining and his black armor resplendent upon his person. Higher and higher he climbed, through the maze-like halls and corridors of Hyrule Castle, never once hesitating, but always moving up. He came to the throne room, throwing the enormous doors open and crossing the threshold, and only then did the sight of men barring his way give Ganondorf pause.
Step aside, he said. Good morning,
Russell said wearily, lifting himself up off of the steps that led up to the throne so that he could bow respectfully.
At least, I believe that it is morning, although after the misery of that long darkness, I cannot be sure.
Russell was dressed once more in the full ceremonial armor that he had worn during his time as commandant, and the gilded sword he bore was the very same one that he had wielded the night his son had died, scarcely 2 months ago. Standing silently next to Russell, in front of the Zelda's vacant chair, was Zant, As always, the vizier's face was completely obscured by the towering helm of stone that he wore, although Ganondorf knew that the mage was staring straight at him.
If you are going to bar my way, then I will kill you both,
Ganondorf said. It was not a threat, and it was not said in malice. It was a simple statement of fact.
Do you want to kill us?
Russell asked, genuinely curious.
It doesn't matter to me either way. My business is with Zelda.
The two stared each other down in silence for a few moments more. When Ganondorf's hand moved towards his sword, Russell raised his hands and stepped away from the dais, leaving a clear path to Zelda's private quarters behind.
As it so happens, Zelda's business is with you. She is waiting at the top of the Tower of the Gods, which is at the very center of Hyrule Castle. The stairway up is through her private quarters. I dare say you know how to get there.
Zant stepped silently away from the throne also. Slowly, Ganondorf nodded.
I suppose you two are here to entertain the other guests she will be expecting.
There was sad amusement in Russell's voice.
Not entertain. Just delay. Go on, the princess is waiting for you.
He turned to Zant.
Go on, then. It's time.
Zant's towering helmet nodded once, and then the vizier silently glided away.
Do you remember the oath you swore, years ago, that night we fought for the first time?
Russell asked.
That we would meet once again in battle.
Russell smiled.
That's the one. It shames me greatly, but I am going to have to break that oath. Go on now, she's waiting for you. My destiny lies elsewhere.
And he walked right past Ganondorf, following the path that Zant had taken down to the battlefield below. Ganondorf spared no more time thinking on Zant or Russell. As he strode across the now deserted hall and brushed past the throne and through the doors behind it, all of his thoughts were on Zelda. As he began the climb up the tower to where she was waiting, the ruthless determination that had carried him this far finally left him. He took the stairs 2, then 3, then 4 at a time, his heart pounding in his chest and dread building in the pit of his stomach. He fought to calm himself, to contain the emotions that were roiling inside his chest and regain his discipline. Ganondorf could not remember ever feeling such anxiety. In his past lives, murder had always been a thing preceded by cold calculation, or by unfettered rage. Never before had he felt like this. Never before had he been afraid. Ganondorf reached the top of the stairs, and burst through the door there and into the open air at the top of the tower. The wind was strong as high from the ground, and it swept thick flakes of snow in underneath the great stone roof, where they swirled and eddied about in the erratic air currents. Bright red banners bearing the sigil of Hyrule were hung on each of the pillars supporting the dome above, and the sounds of fighting could be heard very distantly, drifting up to them from the battle below. Zelda was standing at the far end of the tower's circumference, in a circle that was a part of a much larger design carved into the floor. There was a terrible beauty about her, clad in shining metal and with her long hair blowing freely in the frigid winds.
Ganondorf,
she said, when she saw him.
Will you let me speak?
There was nothing she could say, he knew, that would explain the crimes she had committed. The person she had become.
I will listen. Speak.
He thought he saw her sigh in relief.
This is the true story of how this world was created. A long time ago, there were 3 gods.
Her voice echoed.
Tradition tells us that they were 3 sisters, Din, Farore, and Nero, but in truth they were nameless, genderless, formless. Perfect. They existed in a state of infinite majesty as beings of pure power, in a place without time, or space, or shape. The void.
Ganondorf took a few cautious steps towards her. Something told him that here, at last, was the truth of the sickness that had consumed the woman that had once been his greatest friend.
The gods drew forth some of that power from deep within themselves, and created the universe. They were something less than what they had once been, but now they were able to take physical form, and walk together in the worlds they had created.
He stepped closer still. When he set foot on one of the lines etched into the ground, the carving began to glow with a faint golden light that flowed through the circles and runes like a liquid, until the entire tracework shone.
The next thing that they did was create man, and woman, and beast, and pour blood into their veins and blow breath into their lungs. Now their worlds teemed with life, but the gods themselves were something lesser still. To create life, they sacrificed a portion of themselves, and although their power remained great, it was but a shadow of what it had once been.
She took a deep breath. Her voice had an earnestness to it that disturbed him deeply.
The gods then gave a gift to their people. They drew upon the last ebbing of their power, and in doing so they forgot themselves and became as mortals are. They gave the world magic.
Zelda, Ganondorf began to speak, but was interrupted.
Something remained, deep inside the flesh and blood forms that the gods had taken. Some tiny spark of their former power and glory remained, although none possessed the wisdom to see it for what it truly was. Until now. The Triforce is that spark, Ganondorf. We are gods, you, and Link, and I. Can you not see it? Can you not feel it burning within your heart, the desire to become perfect once again? We can do it, Ganondorf. We can become gods once again. I spent countless lifetimes trying to become a god, he said. That is not a road you want to walk down. You were doomed to fail. You sought to raise yourself above us, to upset the balance of power. The three of us rise and fall together. Look.
She gestured towards her own feet, at the small circle in which she was standing.
This spell will not work unless all three pieces of the Triforce are present. This circle where I stand is my place in the array, and when you and Link stand in your positions, then the spell that I have spent centuries weaving will be completed at last. And this spell, this is why you have built this city. Yes. It is time for us to take back the gifts that we once gave. So if the Triforce is assembled here, then Hyrule will be destroyed. Not destroyed. Made whole. From this tower the magic will spread, until the entire world is consumed in its light and we have regained our old power. Life, and magic, and matter will all be reunited again, through us, and we will know perfection again. It will work. It is meant to.
There was a moment of silence between them, when even the howling of the wind and the chaos of the battle below seemed muted. Ganondorf knelt and laid his hands on the shining lines etched into the ground, appreciating the mastery that had gone into crafting the most powerful magic that ever had, or ever would exist.
Please, Ganondorf,
she said, quietly.
I need you.
Zelda's plan would work. He could see that plainly. All of Hyrule was encompassed in those simple lines, the deepest frozen darkness, the mines glowing with heat, the crowded streets and markets, the lush gardens and the golden temples. All of it would be consumed, transmuted into the purest form of magic and refracted back into the place where they now stood. But she underestimated him. And she hadn't told him the whole truth.
You lied to me. I'm sorry.
She feigned confusion, but he knew her too well.
The magic does not require three people. It only requires one.
Her face contorted briefly into rage, or hate, or some other emotion that she could not fully control.
All three pieces of the Triforce must be assembled for. Exactly.
He drew his sword.
3 pieces of the Triforce. Not 3 people. If one person holds the complete relic, then they can activate the spell that encompasses Hyrule by themselves, and gain all the power you just spoke of, and more.
Before Ganondorf could approach any further, Zelda's rapier was in her hand.
It's true. But I had hoped that it could be avoided. I had hoped that you and Link would cooperate. You're a fool,
Ganondorf said.
You're a fool if you thought either of us would agree to this. Drop your sword.
She stepped to the side, and he turned to as not to present an opening.
But this is what you are,
Zelda told him.
Why share power, when there is a chance that you could have it all for yourself? Well, I may ask the very same question, why should I continue to offer you a chance for redemption, when you spurn me again and again? You're the same man you always were, Ganondorf. A thief and a coward. You were my friend once,
Ganondorf said.
You know this, and you know the pain that your words inflict. Stop this insanity, Zelda, please.
She continued to circle him.
It is too late. The city burns, and the hour has come for Hyrule to fulfill its purpose. Give me the Triforce of power, or I will kill you and take it.
He shook his head sadly.
Then you are beyond all help I can give you, save death. So death it must be. But I regret it.
She lifted her sword into the air, and the blade burned with fire.
"Come, then." "I am sorry,"
he said. The Triforce burned within him, and he met her stare. It was cruel and pitiless, and it burned away the last shreds of doubt that he harbored within him. Ganondorf raised his blade of light and stepped forward, his cold, ruthless sense of purpose renewed. The entire city shook, briefly, and a vision of fire and lightning dancing between thick flakes of snow came to his eyes.
"Gods!"
Midna paled visibly.
"What was that?"
Link craned his head skyward. High above them, the uppermost spires of the castle were wreathed in clouds. As he watched, the entire sky was briefly illuminated by a sharp burst of light, followed almost immediately by another tremor and a distant noise. A light rain was beginning to fall.
"Is that a thunderstorm?"
Groose wondered aloud.
"No,"
Link said.
"It's Ganondorf. Come on, we need to hurry."
They had advanced slowly through the castle gardens, climbing into the upper terrace and circling around to the north side of the building. Visen's assault on the castle's main entrance had succeeded drawing attention away from them, but the gardens and battlements were still riddled with guards. Midna took care of each of them in turn, quietly and quickly. When her plumes of darkness enveloped a man, he vanished, and did not reappear. Link watched the faces of the 30 volunteers who had come with them. Each of them seemed ill at ease with the black magic that Midna was using to clear their path, but not one of them raised any objections. So they kept moving, as the drizzle increased and a cold mist began to envelop the castle grounds.
"All right,"
Ashe said, when they stopped to get their bearings.
"We're maybe 50 meters from the northern walls. The 3 closest entrances to the castle are a service door used by the groundskeeping staff, the guards' barracks, and the delivery entrance to the castle kitchens. There's one more,"
Link said.
"The Temple of Nehru."
Ashe hesitated.
"There is a long set of steps ascending to the doors of the temple. We'd be completely out in the open."
There was another ponderous boom from far above them, and this time Link could see the lightning and flame leaping and clashing amongst the distant towers.
"The temple will be the fastest way to the top. We'll go through the temple. You're the boss."
Ashe's face was grim. They remained low to the ground for as long as they could, creeping along the grass and using the fog for cover, but before long, they came to the staircase that led up to the Temple of Nehru, a wide, tall set of steps that worshippers climbed with their heads bowed, praying for wisdom. The entrance to the temple was an ornate facade of gold and white marble, with images of the goddess carved into the walls. There was someone coming down the steps, an unnaturally tall figure who walked towards them with deliberate slowness. From beside Link, there came a shocked gasp, and then the soft sound of contented laughter. It was Zant coming down the stairs, and Link knew immediately that Midna was going to fight him alone.
"You run,"
Midna said.
"All of you. Do not interfere."
"But," Ashe said.
"Shut up. Leave."
Midna's eyes did not flicker even for a second from the mage descending the steps.
"This fight is mine." "Let's go,"
Link ordered.
"Midna, don't do anything stupid."
But she was already beyond hearing him. Link hurried towards the steps and began climbing, and Zant did not even bother glancing their way as the Garuto rushed past him. There were castle guards atop the battlements and at the top of the stairs, but they too made no move to hinder any of the invading troops as they crossed the threshold of the temple and stepped inside Hyrule Castle. At the top of the stairs, Link turned and looked down at where Midna waited down below, standing motionless in midair as Zant descended the last few steps towards her. A hush fell over the gardens, as if nature itself was holding its breath. The two stared at each other. They were speaking, but he could not hear the words.
"Link, we have to hurry."
Ashe urged him on, and with some reluctance he turned away, walking out of the rain and into Hyrule Castle. The doors boomed shut behind him, and the confrontation outside was hidden from his view. The building shook once more with the tremors of battle far above, and this time those tremors were answered in kind from the gardens below as the entire castle rattled upon its foundations. Link began to run. Chapter end.